The Red Review is brought to you by Growth Ignition, the transformation consulting, training and enabling tech firm in the work-winning space, and their product set, the Bid Toolkit, the online bid processing guide with APMP accredited training and tools to download. So hello and welcome to the Red Review with me, Jeremy Brim. Quite an important episode this time, and I'm actually joined by grown-ups. I'm on best behaviour. An episode on the UK's new procurement regulations, which are very exciting actually. And like I say, I get to speak to a grown-up, a proper lawyer. So welcome, Rebecca. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy. So my name's Rebecca Rees. I'm a partner at the international law firm of Trowers and Hamlins, and I have the honour of heading up our cross-firm public procurement team. So I advise lots of different clients. I'm quite lucky in the fact that I've got a lot of public sector clients across government and what is euphemistically called the wider public sector, so local government, housing associations, NHS trusts. But I also do a lot of work for private sector bidders to the public sector purse, and that's over a wide variety of sectors. So we've got sort of 360-degree expertise amongst my team. So my main role is trying to stop clients from putting something out in tender worlds that is unintelligible or subject to challenge. And if that doesn't work, my colleague Lucy James heads up our commercial litigation team, and they will represent clients and bidders in procurement challenges.
Very good. So as I was saying to you off camera, Rebecca, I've been a big fan for some time actually, and seen you speak very eloquently at various events in this kind of world. So it was a bit of a coup. Fantastic to get you on. And so we're going to talk about the new procurement regs. So it's suddenly, after what feels like a lifetime of noise, obviously Brexit was a very long time ago, and meant that we needed to stop following EU's rules at some point and do our own thing, in theory. Suddenly it all seems to have gathered pace, and you must be one of the most busiest people around. So would you mind giving us a bit of context and backstory to the new procurement regulations, where they came from, the consultation journey, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I've always, as a Ramona, said that we didn't really need to do much as to improve on our public procurement rules. Per se, as a legislative set of rules, they're quite reasonable. But Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson thought otherwise, and surprisingly, even though I and you think that public procurement might be the centre of the universe, I didn't actually think that it would be the number one kind of legislative regime to go through what was then called the number 10 Rules Reform Project. But it was. And I think, interestingly, it was probably because Dominic Cummings didn't like it, because he realised how powerful public procurement is, how and where and with whom governments spend their money is incredibly important in setting what is now a post-Brexit tone. So December 2020, 15th of December, before Brexit, if you recall, we got the government's green paper published called Transforming Public Procurement. And that came with a promise of a bonfire of red tape. We were going to improve access to the public purse of UK PLC by our small and medium enterprises and businesses. We were going to cut down administration. We were going to improve transparency and all other good things. Normally, on green paper consultations, the government can hope to get 200 responses maximum. They got over 600, and I think that that's probably why we think that these are all a long time coming, because actually for the Cabinet Office to chew through 600 responses, particularly from annoying lawyers like me who like to make very arcane but long points, it delayed it. So they missed one Queen's speech and made it into the second one. And then we got the bill, and that's been consulted upon and been through a slightly laborious legislative process. And then on the 26th of October this year, we got the Procurement Act. I think it's fair to say that when we're talking about legislative changes, Boris and Dominic might have wanted to get rid of the rule book, but we are members of the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Government Procurement. And if you look at that agreement, you will see a lot of familiarities or similarities between that and the EU rules, because the EU rules are in line with what we call the GPA, Agreement on Government Procurement. But also, we didn't hard Brexit. We got our trade and cooperation agreement with the EU. And part of that agreement is that our procurement rules were going to be in line with the GPA, but also it was very cognizant of the reforms and the promises that were set out in the Green Paper, Transforming Public Procurement, and it made reference to those sort of initiatives as well, and that coverage. So it was never a blank sheet of paper. I'm not too sure we've ended up with a simplistic legal landscape, but it's a new dawn, and we shall run into it whooping with joy.
Fair enough. And I'm sure their drivers were nothing to do with making it easier for Tory donors to win loads of work on the quiet. But anyway, I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it was absolutely with a straight bat. So fascinating. So what have we ended up with? What is the overview of the new regulations? I should say, by the way, I wholeheartedly agree with you that our landscape, lots and lots of people, lots of suppliers, people that I advise and train in bid writing and things will moan about how, administrative or challenging public procurement could be over the years. But in reality, actually, us Brits are really good at it. And as we found out with the Brexit ferries and stuff, and why we have those regulations and processes to step through, we as taxpayers should be defended from poor procurement, from fraud and all the rest of it. And we are the most compliant country in Europe, and we're following those EU regulations better than anyone. And so no, I didn't really see the need for miraculous change either. But where have we landed up? I guess what's the overview of the new regs?
Yeah, so what I would say is that we've got a partial legal landscape at the moment. So the Procurement Act is really the bones of it. And what we need is the meat now, because as we always say, the devil's in the detail. And what we need is the secondary regulations or the legislation that will come through statutory instruments, hopefully Q1, beginning of Q2 next year. Now, what are those? Those will set out the details of all the transparency obligations. So not only sort of the forms and the different requirements of the notices that the contracting authorities and the public sector clients will need to publish on the central digital platform. We can come back to that one.
Yeah.
But more importantly, what bidders can expect to see. So what type of information will you be able to access and see that needs to be published? I think we also need a lot of guidance coming through, and we've been promised that. Now, how useful that's going to be, we will see. But what the Cabinet Office has done is, in terms of trying to simplify the rules, they've tried to strip out what's in the Act and the secondary legislation to make it more flexible and user-friendly. They want to put a lot of guidance and meat in written either procurement policy notes that we get now or kind of statutory or non-statutory guidance going forward. So that will be a lot of detail, probably sort of policy detail as to how they want you to do things, how they want clients and bidders to interact, etc. And so there is an awful lot for bidders to get their head round. that's just the legal bits. We've then got the policy bits as well, and we've got already the National Procurement Policy Statement. Now that came out in June 2021. We're likely to get a new one, hopefully by October next year. We should definitely get a new one if we get a Labour government in, because I can't see them standing by a kind of post-COVID Conservative government policy statement for very long. And that's kind of adds to the sort of what I'm calling the dispersal of procurement information across the UK. So where it was cutting down on red tape, making it simpler, I think what bidders are going to have to do is get their head round the fact that the entire procurement picture is actually now split into a lot of different chunks. So we've got the Act, we'll have the secondary legislation, we'll have guidance, we'll have the National Procurement Policy Statement, and then going forward we'll have case law as well that will impact on all of that. So I'm not too sure we've ended up with simplicity as part of the transformative reforms.
Right, interesting. And there was, I saw, I didn't actually get to watch it all, but there was, I saw a webinar from the government commercial function a week or two ago where there was talk of moving from, was it 7 different types of procurement to 3, or what were the headlines of how things might be different, I guess, moving forwards for bidders?
Okay, so one of, well, sort of the simplicity flagship of the new reforms is the competitive flexible procedure. So if you recall, under the old rules, you could have the open procedure, restricted, competitive procedure with negotiation, competitive dialogue, light touch, design competition, innovation partnerships, all of these. And what they've done is they said, look, we don't need all of these procedures. Actually, stuff like negotiation and dialogue, interviews, obviously, they're all procurement tools. They are how you get to the end position. They don't need to be enshrined in an individual process. So what we're going to do is we'll keep the open procedure. After a lot of lobbying at consultation stage, we'll keep the light touch for those kind of end user orientated contracts, and we'll always have direct award. But what we're going to do is we're going to take everything else and mush them up into a competitive flexible procedure. Not a legal term. Mushing up competitive flexible procedure is a legal term. And what that is it's exactly what it says on the tin. It is a flexible procurement procedure that clients can adapt to their procurement needs. Now, this is where bidders come in, because actually it says in the new Act that the competitive flexible procedure should be proportionate to the needs of the market. Now, one of the other things that we'll come on to is why we've got this whacking great big 12-month period between the Act coming into force or being receiving royal assent and coming into force. But it seems to me that bidders need to be very clear a lot earlier on in this process with clients as to what their needs are, particularly regards designing a competition. Because what we don't want to end up in the competitive flexible procedure is everybody treating it like a competitive dialogue, whether you're procuring bricks or a hospital. So we need to kind of have a discussion with UK PLC to say, look, you need to be, yes, it needs to be flexible, but it needs to meet our needs. It shouldn't be, and I've nicked this from somebody else, what's called a proxy for effort. You shouldn't make us jump through all these loops for us to prove that we really want to perform your contract or we're the best people. Let's have a process that gets to the nub of our offer as quickly and as cheaply as possible, so we can spend time performing contracts, not bidding for them. So that's the competitive flexible procedure in my mind.
So that's really interesting, because the next question was going to be, what should suppliers, bidders look out for? But I think that might be one of the big things, because I guess, Rebecca, my concern on that then is in the last generation of the EU regs, whenever they were updated, weren't they, to have the SQ and to send out the ITT with the SQ, so you could see how much effort was going to be required and that kind of stuff. The other bit that came with that was that clients, public sector clients, were meant to do decent dialogue with the market before they punted a tender out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure you've advised people. I see it all the time, that what they actually do is a bidders conference, which of course has turned into a Teams call now, where they just talk at you, open a Slido, you ask some questions, they don't really answer them, and then they ignore it and just punt out the tender they were going to punt out anyway. And so, yeah, my slight concern is we're going to find ourselves in that space, but on a bigger scale, actually, where we end up in, sort of clients a bit aimlessly punting out what could be quite a large, difficult procurement or tender process, certainly when you get into the end game, that doesn't actually suit anyone, rather than engaging the market with a hackathon or something up front to shape this stuff. So that's a bit of a worry, I have to say, because I really didn't see what was meant to come out of the last gen of that EU stuff happen. And unfortunately, even the biggest procurement bodies in the land, who may remain nameless, but I'm guessing you would guess who I mean. That I have been on Teams call bidder conferences that were for the biggest construction frameworks in history, where they just played a video. It was a 30-minute WebEx. They just played a video. Actually, they were 28 minutes late for their half-hour call, then played the video for half an hour, and that was it. So yeah, a bit worried about that. So that's interesting. So I don't know whether you agree or disagree. You might not want to say, but what else should suppliers or bidders look for, do you think, in what's going to happen to us in the next year and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that point and putting it in some context, I mean, I've just alluded to this kind of go live process. The Procurement Act's in, and the Cabinet Office has said, look, we've got 12 months before it goes live. So clients, you need to start getting upskilled on it. You need to increase your capacity. You need to appreciate what your capacity is in the first place, and kind of upskill and employ whatever you need to do to make sure that you can embed the new processes to their fullest. I think what that recognises is actually we have only reformed the legislative framework. What procurement really depends on is the skill and the expertise and the overall kind of knowledge and behaviours of procurement professionals within the public sector. Because you can try and introduce as much flexibility or as much nimbleness, is that even a word, into a legislative framework. But if the procurement professionals don't pick it up and run with it, you can have a really cautious and business as usual approach under the new Act, as you could have done under the EU regs.
Yeah.
So we've got in the next year for the market to engage with their clients. And if the reforms are to improve access to the public sector purse, I think it's incumbent on clients to go out to their markets, A, identify who their markets are, B, not wish they were somebody different, like taller, thinner, better looking, because what they need to do is they need to set their conditions of participation, which is the new words for selection criteria, to match the market. Yes, to deal with risks, but not to over-egg the pudding so that all of their criteria mean that they end up with a market of 2 or 3. And how do they do that? The market, if they're not going to approach their markets, the market needs to go to them. And so, like we would on pre-market engagement, bang on their door, say, come on, let's have a discussion. It's not with the aim of sort of unduly influencing you or creating a conflict of interest or some sort of collusive arrangement. It's saying, look, actually, what you've been doing for the last 5 years is a little bit crap. If you now took advantage of the reforms and just nipped that bit, tucked this bit, actually you would get much better bids and much better level of engagement from your marketplace, local or otherwise. So there is an engagement piece, and I think if clients aren't big enough or ugly enough to do that for themselves, then actually bidders need to go to their key clients and have a sort of warts and all conversation. And if clients are sort of nuanced and talking about having grown-ups in the room, then they should take that on the chin, and they should definitely not be designing any new procedures. They should not be developing their new competitive flexible procedure without input from their markets, from their bidders. Otherwise it's just wasted effort. The other things are that, oh sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely bang on. I think that's a great opportunity, isn't it? Because I work with contractors quite a lot in the construction game. I work with outsourcers and IT firms and all sorts, but my home territory is the big contractors, having grown up at Mace and done a load of work with Morgan Sindall and things. And I think there's probably a place for industry bodies in facilitating some of that with the big central government spend, National Hospital Programme or whatever it is. I mean, you probably saw, and I was very frustrated last week, MPs, suddenly realising that payment terms need to be different for modern methods of construction. It's like, oh, wow. We've only been telling you that for fucking 10 years, but anyway, fine. It's not really. So there's this whole sort of awakening, enlightening moment. It feels like we should get industry bodies with some of the chief execs of some of the big contractors and hug it out, have the conversation, how it's going to be different, how it should be different, because it ain't been fun. We've fumbled through getting some alliances for prisons and some of the rest of it, but particularly against the landscape, Rebecca, you probably know better than I that whoever, it doesn't really matter who gets into government next, there ain't going to be a lot of money. And so we're going to have to be pretty bloody efficient in what we do, and it needs to be well procured. So that's an interesting fun. But anyway, I interrupted you. Carry on. You had another couple of points.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, but that is an interesting point within itself, in the fact that because there's not much money, what are we using procurement for? And my frustration is always that procurement is seen as a really easy point to bag yourself a bargain. And, government says all the time, look at the wider concept of value. We've changed most economically advantageous tender to from meat to most advantageous tender, MAT. But actually, I would say that evaluation of most public sector contracts is usually science masquerading as an art, and people don't understand actually how to evaluate tenders in order to get the outcomes that they require, and also that the risk in evaluating it is, or setting your evaluation criteria, is setting behaviours in tender processes from bidders. And I've had plenty of bidders say to me, look, there's no place in this industry, whatever industry we're talking about, for an honourable loser. That butters no parsnips with my, board. And so if a client asks me to do something or sets a rule that says, if I promise you this, I'll win, or I will only get the highest marks if I submit the lowest price, then that's what I'll do. And so actually there is an ongoing dialogue around, what we're actually doing in our tenders, that clients need to, be better, upskilled to deal with.
I was going to say, on our bid writing courses and capture courses and things that we do, we teach about that value concept. But unfortunately, we have to say, actually, it comes down to what the procurement people and the team that mark the bid are measured on. So if they're measured on input price savings, that's the game you've got to play. But hopefully we can influence them way ahead of a tender, maybe get some advice from Rebecca on how do we help shape the scoring criteria so it is on that bigger value play, lifetime value or whatever it might be. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you again. Fire away.
No, just so I mean the biggest one is that kind of encouragement of clients, but the unpopular one in terms of recommendations is read the bill. And I know nobody wants to read primary legislation, least of all the lawyers in the room. But I mean, they're saying that it's very thin. It is, well, that's broadly as thick as the old regs, but anyway, I'm not going there. There are numerous differences. So if you're looking to see selection criteria in a new kind of phrased document, you ain't going to see it. So you need to get up to speed with the vocabulary. It's very clear that all of the European speak that all of us have grown up with and probably think it's British speak is not. It's English constitutional language now, and you literally have to go through it and bust some of that jargon. And on Trowers.com, there is going to be a jargon buster, just so that, you know, bidders can, and clients alike, can work their way through it.
Very good.
Just one more as well, just on feedback and competitive flexible procedure. Now there's not many rules as to what a competitive flexible procedure is going to look like. So what does that mean for bidders? That means that the tender documents that you receive are going to be king. So what the client says they are going to do in the document is what they should do. And so if they depart from that, you will need to go back to the tender document rather than really the rules to see if you can challenge, if you can get them to roll it back, if you can get them to do what they said that they were going to do in the first place. So the tender documents are going to be absolutely key as to the tender process that's going to be run now.
Wow. There are lots of implications of that, aren't there? I think lots of clients are going to need a Rebecca to help them build their tender documents then. Or if they don't, judging by the quality of tender documents I see all the time, there's going to be some interesting conversations, aren't there? Interesting. Yeah,
I mean,
that should be a real efficiency, but
it should be. But if you think about large organisations that might have 20, 30 procurement officers, if you and I were working for the same organisation, Jeremy, your tender document, your competitive flexible procedure might look very different from mine, not only because you're procuring something different, but you might have an irrational fear of interviews, and I might want to interview everybody that comes through the door, you know. And so you cannot assume that just because you bid to one local authority last week via a competitive flexible procedure for one contract, that it's going to look the same for the next contract. So I think actually that puts a lot of time, effort and money into the bid process that shouldn't necessarily be there.
Completely agree. That's really dangerous. So that whole reducing cost of sale by, you know, for instance, the standard SQ, you know, trying to create a nice standard model where you don't have to send everything in, you just got to say you got it until you win, and all that sort of stuff. It sets us back a bit on that regard, doesn't it?
Well, they're still going to have an evidence locker or a tell it to us once. So they're still going to have a standard SQ or conditions of participation now. And the central digital platform should at some point be set up that you can submit that evidence as a bidder once and, you know, leave it there. So that bit's okay. It's the second bit where you're really spending a lot of time and effort and resource in you know, pricing a bid, really.
Yeah, and different questions, potentially different scoring criteria, different mode, whether it's a bid and a presentation and a bit of a dialogue, or so like you say, even with one council or certainly a central government department, you could have quite different bids that you've got to be set up for quite differently. You know, in my world of bid management, you could need slightly different athletes. You might need more bid writers or less. You might need you know, different stuff, presentation specialists, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so in terms of things that people should prepare for, it's perhaps on the list is that potential variance, I guess. But again, I think the onus is probably on us as the market to go to the clients and try and shape some standardization out of that.
Yeah, I mean, the Cabinet Office have said that. Oh, sorry, Jeremy. Yeah, the Cabinet Office has said that they're going to put out examples and some guidance on competitive flexible procedure. So for less imaginative, more cautious clients, you could just see that being parroted back at you. But it always seemed to be a slightly kind of well, it's like oxymoron, where you were going to try and template a competitive flexible procedure. So we'll see where it ends up.
Okay. So last thing then, how should suppliers prepare and their bid teams prepare? So we've got a year, just under a year now. So October next year is in theory D-Day, when the thing goes live. I'm already getting lots of my clients asking me, they're getting lots of emails about various courses and webinars and things. But in reality, what do you think the sort of playbook to preparing effectively for this looks like? What are the key things suppliers should look out for?
Yeah, I mean, on the client side of things, as in public sector clients, they're going to have a lot of free training from the Cabinet Office as to how to implement these rules. But in their wisdom or not, they've not recognised that procurement is a two-sided coin, and that perhaps it would be good to get the other team on board and trained as well, the other team being bidders. So bidders have been left to their own devices. So you mentioned webinars, conferences, get yourself along to as many of those as you can, spare. There's going to be lots of free training around. I would recommend that organisations do more than one course from more than one source, because of course, a lot of it will be conjecture and opinion, even if that's based on, a career's worth of experience. There are still a lot of gaps to fill. So I think, to read the bill, to get some training and get you kind of washed in the waters of the new procurement reform would be good. And then, as I've said, it is really important to go and engage with your key clients to say, actually, if you're just about to be in the new the process of designing a new procurement approach, strategy, policies, procedures, I want to give you some feedback on what I think you're good at and where I think you probably need to improve. Or however you want to say it. I'm slightly more straight talking than others might be prepared to do.
No, are you?
But that way we then get to the client realizing that if it's going to set out a proportionate process, it's a proportionate process to the bidders, and so they should be involved in almost a co-design of procurement. And then finally, and my head of litigation, Lucy James, would expect me to say this, know your levers. There is going to be the procurement review unit, and that should be like the mystery shopper process on speed, hopefully, although there's probably only going to be about 10 to 12 civil servants manning it. But if you want to make a complaint and it's an endemic complaint across a sector or, a client, then you can go to the procurement review unit and they may well look into that. But also your rights as well, at how you engage with clients at the right time and tell them that they're doing something wrong in a way that should improve behaviour as well.
Excellent. And the secondary legislation will come Q1, Q2 next year, you were saying. So do you think that will change things? Should we read the bill, get up to speed, wait for that bow wave to come, and then have another sprint in it?
Exactly. You need to read the bill, because I see it like a skeleton. That's the bones. You'll get the regulations, which are like a little bit of the muscles and the fat. Then you'll get more guidance. And then the training sort of dresses it all as well. So it all has a space. The regulations won't change anything. It will add more detail onto the bones. And part of it now is they're saying, oh, we've brought in all of the regulations from all different areas and consolidated it in one text. Actually, they haven't. There is going to be a lot of information in lots of different places for you to get your head round. And that, I would say, should start sooner rather than later.
Okay, I think that's really solid coaching. Thank you very much, Rebecca. A bit of a speed dating overview dance through what's going on, because it's such a vast subject, but some really fantastic points for people to get their teeth into. And I suspect much more to follow. You're going to be a busy lady. dancing about all over the place, telling people about this stuff for a year or more, I suspect. And so look forward to seeing you about. I suspect we're going to keep learning as we go. Thank you very much for your time, Rebecca. It was great to have you on.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
No worries.